invite our speakers to come up and join us for our last panel discussion. We will keep it relatively quick because I know we've got a nice networking session ahead of us, but I think also there's a lot of exciting things that are here to discuss. So with that, I really appreciate all of your contributions. And I want to start by kind of coming back to our theme. We started the day talking about evolution and disruption, and we chose that theme because we see different approaches towards evolving from a traditional general contractor we saw this morning, and we see other approaches, maybe call it disruption, or maybe just call it starting a new company from scratch. And I wanted to ask, for your three companies, what's the real opportunity and the motivation here to build something from scratch? What do you see as the reason why we need companies like yours versus an evolution from existing builders, architects, etc.?
Sure. Well, first of all, we need both. So I do want to recognize that. The joy for me and the importance of having opportunities like this really is in the freedom of mindset and the freedom of culture. I've worked in both situations and do truly recognize the merits of both. But the opportunity to really stay in a what if we did this and how do we do it, and testing, prototyping mindset really allows for some best outcomes. I think the courage of challenging each other is something that also in a ingrained culture is really hard to keep alive. And I really applaud DPR and the strategic leadership conversation that was presented earlier.
Yeah, just go down the line. Yeah. For us, actually, I come at that answer in two directions. One is this problem has been worked on since like the 1940s. This is not a new problem. And there's been so many ways of slicing the cake, right? For us, it was really important to start from scratch in order to simplify the problem as much as possible so we could focus on getting something right. Because we've seen so many examples of people, and we've heard even today, about overambition or lack of focus, or not being able to get your hands around all of the hard things that you need to get around in order to make a successful solution. And so for us, it was really important to see if we could box the problem down to its smallest possible iteration so we could get some progress and then build from there. And then I also joked when I was talking earlier about this kind of radical incrementalization that we kind of do in the way we think. In order for us to get to the market, we can't invent almost anything. We actually have to find and listen to people who are out there working on amazing things, who have already proven they've made some small progress on their own, and bring those things together in a really novel way in order to kind of get to market, test very quickly, and move on. And so, I think one of the probably my biggest observation in starting out and looking at the problem was that nobody made the problem easy enough, right? We don't have to solve the whole industry's problem. We don't have to design every possible building type with one platform. We just need to solve one problem that has a big opportunity and then go from there.
Daniel or Josh, you want to?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, just bring it close so we can hear. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as we said in our presentation, our main objective is to solve issues we are seeing in the housing market, specifically around ownership. And the market had decades and decades of time to come up with a solution, but the model is fundamentally flawed. So we feel that we will incentivize and we will show a path to resolve this, and industrialized construction is a tool we are using, similar to the rent-to-own model. It's a tool for us. So we're employing multiple tools, financial, physical design tools, technology, and so on. I think I have a book from Walter Gropius from 1932 talking about industrialized construction in Germany as part of the Bauhaus movement. So it's nearly 100 years. And only recently, I think, processes are sophisticated enough where we no longer rely on object repetition, but we rely on process repetition. So actually a kit of parts or a metric kit of parts approach can be feasible. And for us, that's the tool we're choosing to enable ownership and to enable the living experience we want to provide.
That's great to hear. I gave you a second pre-question, but I also said I reserve the right to change. So I had a new question for you as each of you were speaking. And I would say one theme is around, we've talked about asset light, asset heavy, and I don't want to have that conversation because I think we've had a lot of that. But what I do want to ask is in my experience, the most critical part about industrializing construction is about interface management between sub-assemblies, between kit of parts. And we heard about that from Randy. Is one example. And I think a lot of failures or challenges I've seen has come from this new interface management. And my other experience is that asset light makes it more difficult to deal with interface management because you no longer have control over the whole supply chain, you have partners. So I'm curious if you can give us a perspective on the specific strategies that you use to deal with the challenge of interface management, both in design and on-site assembly.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that when I was at Apple, it was about making the most complicated interfaces that you could make so that it looked the simplest, right? The methodology here at Juno is make the connections of parts as dumb as possible, right? Really screws and no connectors, right? Make it as dumb as possible as often as you can. I do think you bring a good point up that the decentralized strategy means that you have to interface with more people and more entities. And quite frankly, that is the big challenge that we face as we try to kind of have more runway because we have less capital need. So we have a different problem to solve than some of the folks who came before. But we think that we can develop with technology the right tools and the right relationships. And quite frankly, it comes down to contracts and relationships between parties and agreements. And it is much more of a human interface problem. And I think with the right techniques, I think that one's overcome. You can overcome that. So as long as you incentive align, as long as people understand that there's a reason that we should all win together, it's just a happier way to succeed. So that's the path we've chosen, and hopefully we'll make a dent.
Someone else?
Sure. Yeah, I have to agree again. A big part of what we're working in partnership with our manufacturers is sort of our relentless quest for simplicity, if you will, and that sort of translates to ease of assembly. But I have long held a very similar belief to BJ here, which is we have all the technology in the world, whether you're asset light or asset heavy. It's the human connection, it's the human interface, it's enabling a culture in which we are curious and or make it so simple that you don't have to be curious in order for things to function. And literally, it really doesn't matter what your business model is, it's how you treat people and how you come together. That's going to be the difference for when technology gets applied or not.
Josh or Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah,
I also agree.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think multi-trade component assemblies are the hardest things to do, and I think we need to think really critically about where the work happens, not only in the BIM environment, not only in the factory, not only in the consolidation yard or the staging yard, but also how do we organize and sequence the activities on site. We need to think about every single step of the process in order to create alignment between different parties, especially in an asset-light organization.
Great. So we're going to have some questions from the audience. And while we see some hands and distribute the microphones, I'm just going to ask one online. So we have a question from James, and I think it follows on what we were just talking about. How are you implementing these new strategies and learning from the previous group of panelists? And more specifically, how does one minimize the number of connection points on site? It gets quite detailed. What do you typically allow for in terms of tolerance to try to avoid the difficulties and costs of making on-site adjustments?
I'm going to let you answer that because I would say that I'm glad I have a team that figures that out.
Well, I can say that tolerance control is probably one of the biggest complexities in a prefabrication context, and its tolerance is actually not one thing, it's multiple things, minimum 3. So you have material tolerances, you have manufacturing tolerances, you have erection tolerance, and then materials are not dead, right? They move with change in temperature, with change in load, like wind loads, things like this. So a building is a living organism to some extent. And I mean, for people who haven't built a high rise, I can tell you, if you see the sway diagrams for high rises, you get really scared. Yeah, so they can sway by several meters or yards in buildings over 300 meters in height. So we try to capture that at every step in the manufacturing process, and we build in the tolerance into the design, be it by the way the joint is designed or by the way the facade panel is hung. And in our specific case, the balconies present a considerable challenge due to the size and the associated waterproofing and differential movement requirements. So it's a matter of management ultimately.
Maybe I can tack on to that. I think you know, when you're thinking about how things come together on site and how can we unlock some of the scalar opportunities and the speed that we need, this is actually also a moment for cultural expression, where we can take DFMA principles and actually celebrate how things come together and celebrate the ease of connectivity instead of trying to hide how we do things all the time. So it's actually, I would kind of flip the sort of, you know, capital M modernism paradigm, where instead of trying to hide things and you know, make invisible how you achieve something, it's actually that assembly can be a source of culture.
Great. So I want to keep maximizing the number of questions. So I think we have one over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Fauzan. I'm a student at Stanford University as civil and environmental engineering. So I haven't personally lived in an industrialized constructed home myself, but on multiple occasions, maybe even more than multiple, I've heard that these homeowners who live in them feel like they don't live in a place that has character, and somewhat they lose that sense of ownership because, you know, everyone has the exact same home, particularly their neighbors. I was just wondering, has there been an attempt to send user feedback or, you know, satisfaction to gauge whether or not that's true or not, and are the designs fulfilling that satisfaction? And probably the follow-up question to that, do you think, you know, that sense of character and the industrialized construction, are they always naturally opposing? Can they be achieved and balanced at the end of the day or not? Thank you.
I guess I'll take that. That's why it was really important for us to start by thinking about when the person lives there. The person that lives there doesn't really mind how it was built, right? They don't really, they might have some pride that, oh, this was an interesting build, but most people that live in a place, especially an apartment building, really care about the outcome more than the process to build the building. It's really it's like us. We care about the way that we build the building because we're into building technology, you know, or a developer might. But you don't want the building to be a victim of its process of being made, and you don't want it to feel commoditized as a result of that process. And so I think it comes down to, you know, what do people gravitate to, what are their values, and can you bring things in the environment that actually resonate with people's values? Number one, can you give people the ability to personalize and not let customization, you know, wreck the system if in fact you're trying to do an efficient building process? You know, what are the ways that you can, you know, let the place live and breathe but really, through that act of life, instead of, boxing in, only a limited number of choices. So for us, we actually have gone through a number of kind of user studies and preference interviews. Our first building won't have users living in it until the end of this summer. I'm sure we'll learn much, much more. And this is one of the things that we learned earlier in one of the conversations, that the product cycle is much slower than software on your phone or a consumer product. So we are limited by that kind of iteration. But we'll adjust as soon as we gather more and more feedback.
Janet, do you want to add?
Sure, I've just completely lost what I was going to say. The manufactured housing did get a really bad rap, right? Which is, we talked about it being hundreds of years old and still not adopted. And part of it was because it had a slump where it was manufactured and it wasn't good quality and it was repetitive. And that bringing industrialized construction and prefabricated homes back into the market, you're almost always starting with a challenge of like, but is it going to be? So really understand and appreciate your question. That being said, I will say you don't need industrialized construction to have vanilla, repetitive homes. So, that's another sort of side of when you take a look at some of the building stock that's gone up recently too. The strong conversation is also around facade selection and context-sensitive design for the neighborhood. And I know that all of the businesses here sort of represent a sensitivity to that, and that's certainly part of the modulus model. It's a steel frame; you can hang pretty much anything on it, and so the responsiveness to the neighborhood is, allows for a certain amount of expression. And then the layouts that I showed you earlier also have been developed to make sure that the maximum amount of space is usable for the user, and that it's sort of very much market tested as a home that people want to live in.
I would be almost tempted to say that the industrialized construction strategies people on the side of the table are employing for more opportunity for a individual expression within the unit and also on the exterior than a traditional building delivery and design process would offer.
Could I add a comment? Just a fun statistic, which I love, is if you like cars, you probably like it as well, which is, I think it's around 30,000 Porsche 911 delivered every year. And it's been fairly consistently around 30,000 a year. I think it was last year, the CEO of Porsche said only 2 cars a year are identical. And it's kind of interesting to think of it in those terms, is that when you think about mass customization, you think about what people will accept and what, as long as you give them the opportunity to configure, then I think when you actually measure on the scale of the people who are most happy with their cars, the 911 is pretty much at the top, if not one of the cars that people are most satisfied with. So I think you can't kind of reduce yourself to thinking just around that fact, as you were bringing up, that having something that's very similar but highly configurable isn't going to be attractive in the market.
We have a question on this side, I think, or maybe I was wrong. Okay. Ian, can you check if it's? Yeah, I'm not sure why we're not picking up, but we won't be able to hear it online. So can we get the other mic real quick?
This is getting serious. Okay, hi. Whoa, sheesh. So in the case of both Neighbor and Modulus, you advertise software as an important aspect of both your offering from the consumer standpoint as an entry point into your experience, and from the design standpoint. In the case of Juno, it's conspicuously absent that you didn't build your own software to do what you did, or maybe you built something. Can you all kind of describe the thought process there, why software is an important part of what you're building? Because there are software out there to do design right now. Or in the case of Juno, why software wasn't important to what you're building? New software?
Thanks, Ian. Good to see you. So in our case, we see technology or software as the connecting tissue between all the different nodes, be it the supply chain, be it the design partners. We have a fully portfolio level performer, which is live, and it's connected to the individual project parameters. And ultimately the user, right? So what the software does for us actually is it builds a direct connection between the user and the supply chain. So, I think that enables us to offer long-term some of the options we want to offer in terms of flexibility and customization. So ultimately, the entire delivery platform and customer platform is built around our software model.
Maybe just to quickly add, I wish Nick was here to answer your question more properly, but I think if I could maybe channel what Nick would say is effectively that there wasn't like any one connective tissue that did all the things that we needed it to do in terms of design, in terms of ERP, manufacturing, in terms of customer facing. So I think, you know, as Daniel said, that connective tissue that was effectively missing. The other thing I just want to say quickly is what I'm noticing too in the industry is that there's a lot of platform building going on at the moment. I don't really know what to make about that, but it seems like, you know, every company is essentially having their own platform. It's just an interesting observation. Yeah.
And you're talking about software platforms. Yeah.
Good. I don't need two. Thank you, though. Ian, thank you. You actually teed me up for a really important conversation that I completely missed in my presentation about modulus. And so the software platform for us has been developed in conjunction with the physical kit of parts, because the physical kit of parts enables us to know that the software is working, right? We're already testing the software with two different kit of parts. So one developed in the US and one developed in the UK. So, and they're the kit of parts that we own. Ultimately, if we want to achieve our goal of helping provide affordable, sustainable homes for everyone, and you look at the housing crisis globally, like you can't get there by scale by just being your own physical delivery company. One of the favorite stats that I have in my head is, you know, in the US, you need, 500,000 housing units per year. And the largest multifamily housing general contractor at NMHC delivers about 12,000 units, right? So unless you have software that can help deliver to a number of general contracting partners, you're just not going to get the scale. And so ultimately, it's now, next, and future, right? But ultimately, our software is being designed agnostically so that Juno or DPR's product library could be connected into the software, and users can then have a greater choice of what sort of housing solution they're looking for on a parcel of land.
And BJ, do you have a short answer for that?
Short answer is there is lots of software happening in the background. There is not one software that solves the problem for us. And we've actually taken the strategy to understand what we're doing first, run through it in a more kind of, you know, less development heavy strategy so that we understood our requirements. And we are now starting to kind of go forward, but the story isn't necessarily about the software for us. The software is an enabler. And so we're not a pure software company. So I didn't speak a lot about it, but there's lots of software. We have a software team, but at the moment we're not making that like the product we're selling.
Good. And Ray, if you have a very short last one for us.
I hope it'll be short. You know, I think the European markets for housing, especially low-cost affordable housing, are very different than the US in the sense that government is a long-term, steady purchaser. It's no accident that this evolved in countries like Sweden, Germany, and the UK. before it evolved in a place like the US, which is a market economy. And we also what happened in Operation Breakthrough when stagflation occurred. All those companies went broke except one. And so the question that I'm asking about is, CIFE used to always talk about product, process, and organization. Today I heard product, process, ecosystem. And that's sort of market versus, or hierarchy versus market. And so you can do everything internally and have a capital intensive operation if you have a long-term steady demand. If you have a fluctuating demand, which is one of the things that characterizes, I think, very much the US industry, the challenge is to be able to stay capital light so you don't get stuck with a lot of stranded capital. Some of you heard me say this before, but do you all think that there is an opportunity with this long-term housing shortage in the US to create more vertically integrated solutions like we heard from Jan-Hendrik Goldbeck this morning? Or is it better to do this ecosystem play? In other words, is it easier to get part of your different departments in your organization to work together if it's all under one roof, with all the organizational politics that we know happens and so on, and competition for promotion? Or is it easier to do it in an ecosystem? And the technology is surely allowing easier collaboration in an ecosystem now than it did before, but I'm curious to get each one of your perspective on that.
I'll just start. I think for us, the ecosystem model allowed us not only to stay asset light, but also to stay technology or design solution agnostic. Like we can change, we can find a better technology and jump to it. The way our components are organized and designed is that they're not dependent on each other. We can move and change. We can change HVAC system. We can change the millwork. We can change the structural system if need be. So it also means that in the United States we can get competition for the subcomponent that we want to build, and we don't have to get stuck. Hopefully we have long-term relationships with a company, but doesn't mean we have to be wedded to just one. We can have regional relationships. We can have competition for price, and that's kind of how the market works in the United States. And so to go, but starting on a direction and tacking until we could get to the right solution, and being able to be nimble and agile, and we thought that was the best business strategy to go forward with.
Yeah, there's a lot of similar reasoning for the strategy choice for us. Another quite simple reason is we have venture dollars and we have project dollars, right? And I'd rather spend the venture dollars on R&D rather than buying a huge amount of equipment and being helped by it, and then all the agility in the solution finding BJ is describing is really important to us as well. So I think it's a natural choice for us where we are with our company to choose an asset light strategy. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing really fast? I'm sorry, just on the way over. I'm actually thrilled to be sitting here with two other companies that actually have an ecosystem strategy, because it means that I'm not all by myself.
You're not crazy.
Trying to convince a market to change, right? It's a wonderful thing to actually see like that there might be a demand for components within the marketplace. There 10 years ago, no demand, right? 5 years ago, a little bit of demand, right? But if enough of this is kind of growing around us, it's actually quite feasible that there will be a kind of a marketplace for these kinds of components, and it just makes all of our lives easier because people have the right mindset. They're going to lean in the right ways and go forward.
The last word is yours, Janet.
Okay, couldn't agree more. At this stage, I never think of anyone being in competition because we all need to band together to create the market change. The last word on the agility of the marketplace, I think for me, it's about being able to work with people who are driving into their own expertise and having the light sort of market competition sort of allowance to that. So lesson from Katerra, we were trying to be our manufacturer, our supply chain, our everything. And as market demands and COVID happens, we had to adapt with that. If we were working with an independent logistics and an independent manufacturer, they would have had much stronger relationships, agility, forecasting to manage what's going on in the world. And so staying asset light, staying in the ecosystem really drives, it connects you to everybody's sense of expertise.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Really appreciate all the insights. I think you held the audience's attention despite the fact that the happy hour is only minutes away. So thank you very much for your contributions, and let's thank our panelists one more time.